Ready.
All right.
Welcome back to the Atheist Christian Book Club, a monthly gathering of both atheists and Christians with respectful discussions about important books from both perspectives. Our book today, Why Evolution is True, by Jerry Coyne. Jerry Coyne, PhD, professor of ecology and evolution at the University of Chicago. We've been discussing his book. I do want to talk about another book real quickly here. We have a gift for everyone here today, Creation Q&A. Truett Billups, who's one of our club members. In fact, actually about 4 or 5 of our club members are authors themselves, and Truett's one of them. Truett wrote this book.
Well, I wrote it for the organization.
For the organization.
Truett.
Very impressive.
Hold it up, Bill.
Scientists checked it. Can you see that?
Right there, perfect.
Truett, I have seen the light. I've been briefly looking at this.
And those who are watching the video on Facebook Live and they just have to have one of these, but they're not here to get one from you, how could they order one?
Yeah, they can go on ICR.org.
ICR.org, and you can order this yourselves. Creation Q&A. 32 big questions. Are any of the questions that was come up here this evening so far in here already?
Yeah, like all.
See, we could have saved all of them. We could have saved so much time by simply reading the answer book on that.
That can be
it
next.
was designed to. It was designed, you know, because it's a lot of questions, you know. People
Can we
have a
pass
lot
them
of-
around?
Yeah, pass them around.
So that was just designed to say, hey, this is what our organization thinks about all these questions, and it's a lot of the, you know, the biggest questions that you'll run into, and you know, we give a paragraph or two response. Just
Question 11: does the fossil record show evolution? See, we could have saved a ton of time.
Yeah.
This ahead of time. So, but seriously, thank you for the gift. Appreciate that, Truett. Let's go ahead. Of course, we're talking about Jerry Coyne's book, Why Evolution is True, but we want to talk about and announce what the next month's going to be. So we're going to be looking next month at the Science and the Mind of the Maker. And this is by Melissa Travis Cain. Melissa is a professor of apologetics at Houston Baptist University. She is she's a PhD candidate at Faulkner. She's an assistant professor there at HBU, and I think this is going to be a little interesting book. We're going to also try to bring her in via Skype to take questions that you might have, so get an early start on the book, and if you want to ask a specific question. And Daniel, you had something for me?
Melissa is in our book as well.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And the title of your book again is?
Story of the Cosmos.
The Story of the Cosmos.
Coming out on the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing.
Remind me when that is.
July 20th of next year, but the book will be coming out on the 16th.
And
we
it's
have
in the Harvest House is the
Harvest
publisher.
House. We have Bill Craig. We have the Vatican astronomer, Brother Guy Consolmagno. We have Guillermo Gonzalez, Melissa Cain Travis, Holly Ordway, Michael Ward. We have Paul Gould. We have and some astrophysicists, theologians, philosophers, and myself talking about the story of the cosmos from a Christian perspective, and we don't get into the age question.
Daniel Ray, definitely your book's going to be one of our book club books, I'm sure, and I kind of have a sense that we might be able to have one of the authors with us that night to take some questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's not going to be a requirement for us to write a book to be here.
Eventually.
We're working that way.
Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. In about 2 years. Oh, jeez. I better get started.
As eventually, it doesn't have to be about Christianity or atheism, though. So get your book written. So that's going to be our book, and I'll get you guys out an email or a text or something where you can, links to that.
Can we pass these out?
Yes, I think we already got the. Oh, yes, go ahead and do that. Thanks for remembering. Pass that out. So.
Was that my suggestion?
Huh?
Is that?
No, it wasn't.
Actually, I had already started reading that about when it first came out, and then I had forgotten until I was at Harvest House. That's also my publisher.
Yeah, I know Terry.
And we were sitting down, and that was one of the books that they wanted to talk to me about. And I said, I forgot. That needs to be one of our book clubs. Then you mentioned it. That was like another confirmation. So
Could I show a picture?
Yeah.
I want to contest the idea that all the fossils are just conjecture and built off of teeth or leg bones or whatever. This is Turkana from 1.6 million years ago in Kenya.
Is that human?
Wow.
It's intermediate.
How do we know that? That it's intermediate?
Well, the shape of the brain is more like the shape of the. It's more ape-like than ours.
So it's not a human. That's not was not a human.
It's a hominid.
It's a hominid. Turcana it's Homo erectus. But I mean, sometimes if you just a tip, if you're trying to debate somebody else on the other side, you want to engage with their best evidence, not with their worst evidence, just as a matter of course. Okay, so don't talk about the fragmentary bones. You know, when there exist bones that are less than fragmentary.
Well, Ken, would you mind posting that on the Friends of the Atheist Christian Book Club, that picture for us, and maybe a link or something?
Sure.
That would be good. But that's a good point. We want to look at the best arguments. I think Christians have to agree that Christians sometimes have some terrible arguments to try to make their case. And we don't want Christianity.
Video on that.
Christians don't want to be judged on our bad arguments.
Yeah, that was my thought when we were watching the video. It's like cringe, you know. I mean, there's better defenders of creation than that lady there.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, she said that
Yeah.
to prove God creation. She said you have mom and dad that has 13 different kids and they're all different. He goes, Richard Dawkins, you can see the video, and he goes, that's proven random variation of species. You're just making my point, so you know.
Yeah.
But she tried.
So let's go back and talk some more. We talked during the break a little bit with Daniel Ray and I, and you had like 4 insights on, or 3, I think it was.
3 quick things.
3 quick things that you wanted to maybe make a point of from Why Evolution is True, the book by Dr. Coyne.
So just a brief background for everybody. I'm not a cosmologist. I'm not formally scientifically trained, but I've spent the last 4 years studying the intersection of cosmology and literature. I did my master's degree on that. How science is communicated to the popular level, specifically cosmology, I focused on that as the science, and how it's communicated through the written word. And I mean, that's what you have to do. If you're a good scientist, I mean, Dr. Coyne is a good communicator, whether you disagree with him or not. He has an ability. Richard Dawkins does as well, Lawrence Krauss, Neil deGrasse Tyson, whether or not you agree with their worldview, they have an ability to communicate. They can use words and make metaphors that make things not just understandable, but enjoyable. Carl Sagan was probably a master at communicating science with words. So my background is in the intersection of that for lay people, and that's how I ended up with this book. I'm the lay voice in it. So with Dr. Coyne's book, I'll make it clear that these are my observations from him and not an indictment on evolution or the theory as a whole. So let me make that clear. I'm not generalizing from Coyne to everybody. But the 3 things, and you can look them on the page if you have the paperback, are time, terrorism, and a template. I'll start with the simplest one. On page 55, you will see that the chapter subtitle is Remnants, Vestiges, Embryos, and a Bad Design. So that's the template. And what seems to underlie Jerry's book, because he mentions if a creator this, if a creator that, what is never made clear is that it's obvious, well, it's clear Jerry does not believe, Dr. Coyne does not believe that God did this. And whether you're a theistic evolutionist, whether you are an evolutionist or a Christian, the thing that's not defined here is if the biological life that we see, both living and dead, is not divinely designed, then what I can only assume is that you would know what divine design would look like. If not what we see, then what? So in the denial of this being God's created order is the implicit claim that we would know, or Jerry would know, what God's design would look like. Mm-hmm. And I would simply ask, how does the skeptic define what would constitute divine design? So that's the question. Just a question to throw out there. The second one is terrorism. And if you go to page 111, and what do I mean by terrorism? Well, I'm sensitive to the use of language. This has been my key study for the last 4 years. And I found Jerry's use of metaphor entertaining, but also deeply revealing. He talks about the giant Asian hornet. And he goes on to say about how it interacts with honeybees. So when I say honeybee, my English teacher did this in 12th grade. What are the connotations when I say honeybee? What do you think of?
Nice, sweet.
Cute, innocent. Oh, look, honeybees, right? You know, your wife and kids in kindergarten hanging from the ceiling, and honeybees are cute and innocent, right?
They sting you.
They sting you, right. It could be nasty. But so I just the use of metaphor here is telling, because Werner Heisenberg was a philosopher, was a physicist in the early 20th century who was trying to uncovered quantum mechanics. And what he and Niels Bohr and others were trying to do was to come up with the appropriate language to describe something that had never been seen before. And he writes in his books, Physics and Philosophy, the difficulty of reconciling the scientific knowledge with the appropriate English language to convey this to people. What's going on here? We have to find the right metaphor to get as close to the truth as possible. And so that they were actually, for the first time in a long time, bereft of a language to explain quantum mechanics. And so what Heisenberg and then later C.S. Lewis, as I read Lewis's thoughts on this science as well, they came to the same conclusion. The metaphor reveals, probably maybe more than the evidence that you're presenting, reveals your core belief about what you think about reality. So keep that in mind as I read this. One of the hornet's prime victims is the introduced European honeybee. The raid on a honeybee's nest involves a merciless mass slaughter that has few parallels in nature. It starts when a lone hornet scout finds a nest. With its abdomen, the scout marks the nest for doom. Placing a drop of pheromone near the entrance of the bee colony, alerted by this mark, the scout's mates descend upon the spot, and a group of 20 or 30 hornets arrayed against a colony of up to 30,000 honeybees. But it's no contest. Wading into the hive with jaws slashing, the hornets decapitate the bees one by one, with each hornet making bee heads roll at a rate of 40 per minute. The battle is over in a few hours. Every bee is dead, and body parts, not bee parts, body parts, litter the hive. The hornets stock their larder. Over the next week, they systematically ravage the nest, eating honey and carrying the helpless bee grubs back to their own nest, where they are promptly deposited in the gaping mouths of their hornet's own ravenous offspring. So in case you didn't get the metaphor, Gary clarifies it for you. This is nature red in tooth and claw, as the poet Tennyson described. And so I found this metaphor to be telling of Jerry's deeper understanding of reality. This is the metaphor I came up with. The bees and the hornets don't tell you you have to describe them this way. I could have described the hornets as cattle ranchers who are going in and making beef and feeding their young with the beef. We don't talk about cattle ranchers in Texas like ISIS soldiers. You know, a cattle rancher goes to the ranch and raids the poor innocent cows and cuts their heads off. We could talk about it like that, but that would not be an appropriate metaphor for.
So you're not saying Jerry has an agenda, are you?
I'm saying I'm saying that his choice of metaphor reveals his.
We got it.
Yeah, so you got that. Okay, so that
reveals what?
Reveals what he thinks of nature,
Which is
violence, and you know there's a fear factor involved in that, Conrad.
Okay.
It's subtle. I'm not saying that he's trying to scare us into evolution, but if you watch the video and overall you take it all in, there is a subtle intimidation factor here in accepting this theory.
He's also making implicit moral statements.
Yeah, that the hornets are evil, or there's no God, or look at how violent life is. If there was a designer, this would be a collaborative. We'd come over, have coffee, we'd sit down, the bees and the hornets would have tea. Nobody would lose their heads.
Can we get along?
Can the hornets and the bees get along? And then the last one is time. And this is on page 141. And the last thing is time, and I'll just leave it here. It says, one reason why people raise 141. One reason why people raise this question is because they don't or can't. Notice that. Appreciate the immense spans of time that selection has had to work. So, in essence, this is like Matthew 19. With man, this seems impossible, but with time, all things are possible. And so time becomes, he's not saying this, but it's implied, that time becomes the agent, the causal agent by which all of these things are possible. And so in that regard, Christians and people who accept evolution both accept that the impossible is possible with just the right particular mechanism, whether it's Chronos or Christ.
Right. Yeah, the thing with the time, you see that and this came up just a little bit with the Aaron Ra back 2 years ago, but you have this idea of spontaneous generation, which the medieval people believed that if you leave garbage alone for enough time, it becomes flies. Spontaneous generation. Well, science disproved that later, because they showed if you isolate the garbage from living flies that could plant the larva, that you'll never get flies out of it. Well, evolution comes in and reissues the same proposition. No, you can take inanimate objects, if you give it enough time, you do get flies and humans and everything else. That there's going to be some kind of spontaneous generation. Aaron Ra had used spontaneous generation, been critical of the term, because the encyclopedia, or the dictionary, he referred to a dictionary that basically equated that with the idea of evolution or abiogenesis, and what he did, abiogenesis actually, and he actually wrote the dictionary and pleaded with them. He produced the letter to change the definition. And it's one of the few times I've ever seen someone argue that the dictionary needs to be changed to support that. But yeah, what the argument is, if you take inanimate, non-life, and give it enough time, enough chronos, eventually you get not just flies, you get everything.
And Saturn was, I mean, it's really interesting. My connection is a little bizarre because I love literature and mythology, but if you look at the mythology of Kronos, there are similarities of Kronos devouring his children, a fear, a melancholy, a foreboding, intimidating. You know, it's not a good god. He's not a.
Well, there's the interplay with the two gods, Kronos and Chaos, and so you also have to have that chance factor,
right,
which is placed right back into what we're talking about.
Just the last thing on time, and then I'll just stop talking. The idea that there's certainly a lot of infilling of theory. There's stories to be told, and even Jerry says, I say Jerry, I don't mean to be disrespectful when I do that. He says on page 228, he says, but imaginative reconstructions of how things might have evolved are not science, they are stories. And so, in one sense, I'm not saying that everything he's saying is a story. I'm not dismissing everything he's saying. But in any, whether you're a Christian or an evolutionist, there's missing data. We don't have the whole story. But one of the things that I found interesting, more so than I had realized by reading this book, is how casual Dr. Coyne speaks of millions of years. And so for all the mysteries that exist, it seems a kind of a stretch to just throw a blanket of a million or a billion years over something and say, almost with a kind of certitude, that this is what happened in that time span of 12 million years. And that, I'm not saying that he's wrong, I'm just saying that's I mean, can we talk about what happened last week in Los Angeles on the beach with all the little microorganisms going around? I mean, just in a week, we couldn't explain everything that's going on the planet. When we extrapolate back millions of years, it seems like a stretch to say that we've got it all nicely lined out. That just seemed like a lot for me to assume. I'm saying it's not true. But
the last quote you just read kind of answers your first critique, where he talks about, you know, we can make up stories, but it's not science.
Yeah.
So we don't have to imagine what life would look like if it was designed by God, because we can all imagine it differently.
Well, sure.
Any life could look like anything that was designed by God. What we have is we have a design, like, for example, an example he uses, the tubes going through the prostate gland. You know, we have, he mentions how the prostate gland, you know, it swells and it cuts off the urethra, makes it hard to urinate, things like that. So we have examples of designs that, if you look at what we do have, it looks like things that might have happened naturally. It looks like something that, you know, earlier they talked about the jaw bones, you know, the bones separate, now it turns into the ear bones. So what we have is, he's saying, if you look at what we do have, it looks like it came about naturally, it looks like it came about gradually, rather than somebody who just really thought, how would this work most efficiently?
Well, yeah, well, so when he talks about efficiency in design, though, he's still taking on the paradigm of a creator and saying, I could have, or it should have been, or it looks like. There still has to be a schematic or a template for divine design. So if I asked any skeptic, if I said, would you recognize divine design if it existed? That's the question.
So I'd like to speak to that.
Go ahead.
When you look at fragments of papyrus scrolls, and you look at, you try to create a lineage of, well, this one was copied from this one, was copied from that one. How do you do that? Well, you look for perhaps mistakes, spelling errors, or whatever, and you see, okay, in the original it was spelled this way, it was spelled correctly. This one, it was spelled incorrectly, and every one that we found after that was spelled, had the same exact spelling mistake, right? So you would conclude that the one, you could build a tree based on things like that. So you're not making an assumption about a perfect design or a lack of a perfect design. You're just making assumptions about how things are copied. And so, for example, one of the better examples he gave in the book, I think, to address your question directly, was the vitamin C, the genes for creating vitamin C. So most mammals have the ability to generate their own vitamin C, whereas primates and guinea pigs don't.
They have the gene, it just doesn't work.
Right, it's there, but it's happens to be broken in the primate lineage. It happens to be broken in the same place. It could be broken in any number of places that would inactivate it or disable it. But it happened to be we share the same broken gene, and it's broken in the same place. So that speaks to me of a copyist error, in a sense, that gets passed down from one generation.
But the idea of error, Ken, introduces, there's two questions there. There's still, would you recognize divine design if you saw it? And two, the idea that this genetic similarity means from a common ancestor, or as you say, an error. If the error, again, the language, the connotation of error assumes, like, it's different with text.
I could be more.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's different with text. We're looking for a word that's misspelled.
Broken in the same place.
Yeah, if we're looking at a word that's misspelled, that's human sentient intelligence. When we're talking about natural selection and genetics, to say that there's an error, I know that's a metaphor, but to me the question still bears down to, what is the schematic for divine design? If it's not this, how do you know that?
Well, even Francis Collins gave up a lot of ground. Remember, he said, I just cannot see God having a deactivated gene in all this junk DNA, which was one of Jerry's big evidences, is you have this genome and you have this junk DNA, and in creationists will go, oh my God, no, some of that DNA has really good benefits and stuff. Yes, some of it, but why, if you had a designer, why would he have any? Does that make sense?
Hey, Bill, let me throw this one out.
Sure. That's old science.
Think about like a mechanical spray spray painter. You know, the things you use to spray the paint on. Think about it like this. If you might look at it and go, man, that's a bad design. Look at how much paint it wastes. I mean, that's a lot of wasted paint. Or do you look at it and go, wait, hold on. The paint is inexpensive. The labor for the guy to spray it is expensive. So before we call it a bad design, I think we have to be able to understand what the design was, and I think that that's where.
So I think we got off track by the word error. Excuse me for using that, and I'm trying to get back to neutral ground, because we have genes that serve a purpose in one species, but that same gene is disabled in another species.
Although it's present.
But there's no purpose in natural selection.
So I'm just saying.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, when we're talking about metaphors, I mean, the descriptors reveal something, and like I said, what we were talking about last month, when you talk about purpose, intent, I mean, even Jerry says several times that stuff looks like it was designed to fit its environment, but then backs up and says, well, how silly it is for people to think there was a design.
Let's do this. We do have a relevant question coming in from our online, from our Facebook Live audience. Justin, you want to share that with us?
Yeah, this is from John Hinkie, which I think he gets a question in most of the times.
Sure.
We appreciate that. Says, regarding the question of design, I would be interested to hear Christians describe what something that has not been designed looks like. If you believe everything in the universe has been designed, how could you identify something that had not been designed?
Okay, that kind of takes that question and reverses it, flips it around.
Flipped it right back.
Any ideas?
You have to start, for me, I'll answer it personally, you have to start with a template. Somewhere. You have to start with a template. And for me, I start with Christ and Colossians, that by him and for him all things were created. The opening of the Gospel of John, the opening of Romans. These attest to that the things that God has made reflect his invisible attributes. And so what we are taught in the Christian church is to start with Christ as our foundational, we call it the Kantian a priori epistemic, or however you want to mold that Jesus is the beginning. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the bright and morning star, the star of Jacob, the Son of Righteousness. He is the creator and sustainer of everything. And so you look at the characteristics of how do things in nature reflect the nature of Jesus. And that's how I do it. Does that mean I can conclusively see it? But that's my pattern, that Christ is the standard by which I assess design in the world. That they model his attributes.
We got it.
If you want to see an example of something that is not designed, I would say the chaos on my desk. An example.
That would be my answer.
Certainly ungodly, at least.
You have a
Second
comment,
law of
Truett?
thermodynamics.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that question.
Truett
It comes
has
down to probability theory. I don't know if anyone studied probability theory. But it answers that very question. It looks at what's the probability that this, and you can't, and you look at certain cases where you can say this is chaos, this is order. And that's what probability theory does. What's the probability that this would be a certain way? And if it wasn't a certain way, it couldn't perform the function. I mean, that's, it's the fine tuning of the universe thing. It had to be these certain values, and if there were anything else, the universe wouldn't exist. So we can't tell, and like Christians do believe that chaos exists, called sin, destruction, and all that stuff. We can tell when something isn't designed. Rocks scattered over a particular surface. That's not designed. But if it adheres to a certain predetermined pattern, then that would be evidence of. So it's probability theory.
Yeah, the fact that there's a pattern at all seems to imply design.
Well, there's a predetermined way that had to be in a sense to function that sort of
Well,
way.
like the homochirality problem that to get life started, you need all the amino acids to get proteins, which is to be left-handed, right? Or is it 19 out of 20? I
can't remember.
But anyway, they all have to be left-handed, and if it was random, you'd think it'd be an equal mixed, So that's the problem. You have the DNA protein, you need the DNA information to make the proteins.
You make that from RNA, can't you?
That's a long leap. There's a book called The Signature of the Cell by Stephen Meyer, which goes over, he says, you just can't get RNA to DNA. It's just too many problems. He lists like 5. I would recommend it for the club, but it's so esoteric. It's so complicated.
Well, on the question of the abiogenesis, which is kind of, if you take this whole evolution discussion a step further back, I think it is problematic, and I'm not saying that it's impossible to create life from non-life, but all the best scientists in the world and the best laboratories can't do it. So if they were able to do it tomorrow, all that would show is that you can have intelligence and purpose can create it. So that's. I guess that goes back to that chronos, and given enough time, that the universe is going to be able to self-create life that scientists don't have the ability to do right now.
To the Facebook question, I mean, page 115 in Coyne's book is the woodpecker skull. After he goes through an extensive series of describing how specially crafted the woodpecker skull is for beating the heck out of trees, he says, everywhere we look in nature, we see animals that, and he italicizes it, seem beautifully designed to fit their environment.
But then later he says that that's an appearance of design, not actual.
And so that raised the question for me is, what standard of design is he using to make these assessments?
Yeah. Well, he admits the woodpecker is amazing. I mean,
he does. So what you're saying is, on the one hand, he says it doesn't look designed, and you look at the wasps and the hornets and the honeybees. But at the same time, he acknowledges that much of it does look very much designed.
And then doesn't leave us with if God designed it, here's column A. If he didn't, this is column B is what we expect. So he gives us column B. But never, he doesn't even tell us if he's using a yardstick. Are we using meters or scales, ounces, pounds? How are we differentiating between apparent design and actual design?
The woodpecker looks designed, but not the hornet.
No, the hornet's an ISIS. The hornet.
An ISIS hornet.
He does try to have it both ways a lot, because he will say, why would God design something this way? Well, how do we know why he would? But he'll say that, but then he'll turn around and speak of evolution. He'll go, and why is this way? We don't really know yet, So I wish he was a little bit more consistent there,
Well, and I think too, for me personally, I'll just stop talking. I'm sorry. Let me stop, Bill. You're giving me the eye.
No.
He gives everybody.
So you're
the
misinterpreting the
But
data
that, the thing to me is that, let's just say that, you know, the world is under the heavy hand of entropy and the second law, and things are crumbling. If we spill our tea, it's not going to go back into the cup. If we break things, it's not going to reassemble. But that God came down in the flesh and took on a human body that was also subject to the second law of thermodynamics, and suffered hunger, thirst, cold, sadness, sorrow, rejection, and torture and death, and subjected himself to not only the laws of physics. He who sits above the laws of physics subjects himself to his own moral law and his own physical law, in body, in spirit, in every way, was tempted and as human as we are, and came down into the chaos to recreate it. And so the decay, I don't know how this works. It's kind of Genesis 50:20. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. That he works through the chaos. He takes us through it and delivers us through it, and then resurrects, and the new creation begins with his resurrection. And so he comes down into the creation as deep as he can go. The creator of the heavens and the earth comes down to this little place, comes down and gets buried in it, rises up from its depths to start recreating a new heavens and a new earth.
Well, thank you for that testimony there.
I think Justin has a back from John on Facebook Live. He has a follow-up question for us. I think.
Yeah. He says, I appreciate the answers. If you believe God created the universe, doesn't that mean you believe non-designed is not even logically possible? Which I kind of
that's a good question, because our worldview.
I cited Colossians because I said that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
let me make a distinction here too. Just remember, when you talk about design, that is one thing. That's the development of a structure, an architecture, or something. Okay. Often here we also are talking about change. Okay, and change is not the same as design. You can design for change. Okay, so as we talk about these things, just remember, let's not say design is change, because change is a distinct thing, and change is a very fundamental philosophical, metaphysical issue. How we change and what changes is things that we're still trying to figure out.
I think John's question, though, is it go back to that worldview and that puzzle piece? Yeah. Because we're Christians and we believe God created and has a purpose and a telos, does that mean that we can't even see or think of the possibility of undesign?
Yeah, I have
so it makes it impossible. Is there some truth to that?
Yeah, I have to admit, I really can't. I can't even imagine what that would look
like. You'd have to say that's right. There's the alpha and omega. It's done from that perspective. But remember, we're talking about design, not change. Okay, that doesn't mean things aren't changing or adapting or stuff like that. Yeah. But design is we would say yes, it's complete. The story's done. The book is written.
I mean, he who has never changed, he who does not change, went through the process of embryonic development, was born, lived a life, changed bodily, and died. This is the scandal of the Christian faith. The God who made it.
Paradoxical. Can an atheist respond? So like, could we? I don't know.
Yeah. I don't. I'll talk.
I'd like to read.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because you were talking about the origin of life, and it's been a little while since conversation before. This is again Francis Collins, evangelical Christian. Given the ability of science thus far to explain the profound question of life's origins, some theists have identified the appearance of RNA and DNA as a possible opportunity for divine creative action. If God's intention in creating the universe was to lead to creatures with whom he might have fellowship, namely human beings, and if the complexity required to start the process of life was beyond the ability of the universe's chemicals to self-assemble, couldn't God have stepped in to initiate the process? This could be an appealing hypothesis, given that no serious scientist would currently claim that a naturalistic explanation for the origin of life is at hand. But this is true today, and it may not be true tomorrow. A word of caution is needed when inserting specific divine action by God in this or any other area where scientific understanding is currently lacking. From solar eclipses in olden times to the movement of the planets in the Middle Ages to the origins of life today, this God of the gaps approach has too often done a disservice to religion and by implication to God, if that's possible. Faith that places God in the gaps of current understanding about the natural world may be headed for crisis if advances in science subsequently fill those gaps. Faced with incomplete understanding of the natural world, believers should be cautious about invoking the divine in areas of current mystery, lest they build an unnecessary theological argument that is doomed to later destruction. There are good reasons to believe in God, including the existence of mathematical principles and order in creation. They are positive reasons based on knowledge rather than default assumptions based on temporary lack of knowledge. So I just wanted to give a different perspective of the whole,
right, and that's from a Christian.
Yeah, definitely from a Christian
But
perspective.
I think for me, when I'm not saying you're saying I'm God of the Gaps doing this, but I think the thing that I've seen in God of the Gaps when I've been accused of it, I'm not saying you're doing it, is that so a Christian might, this is how it goes. I'm positing, oh look, nobody knows how black holes came to be. God must have done it. We find out a mechanism for how black holes are created or whatever, and then God sort of disappears or fades into the background. I don't argue that way. I think if you were to find out the mechanism of every organism and of every star and of every planet, if you found a material explanation for it, it's the same thing as a barista at Starbucks. We can explain the mechanism of the espresso machine. That's not mutually exclusive to the actions of the barista. And so I would say, yay. Let's not argue that when we find a mechanistic explanation that impedes being able to explain God. It doesn't, because what starts to happen in the opposite respect is that the mechanism becomes the causal agent. Mathematics kind of takes over as the ultimate explanation, as if the steam in the espresso was the ultimate explanation for coffee. Whereas
another example of that is that when you understand internal combustion and all the mechanisms of a car, that doesn't disprove the existence of Henry Ford.
Right. There's two very very valid reasons for why something can be, and so I think the God of the Gaps. I'm not saying you're doing this, but that can be.
But here's the thing: you've got 99% of all species just die off. It seems so wasteful and so ridiculous. And then human evolution, you have the Homo ergaster, dies out, Homo habilis, dies out. And then you have two species, Neanderthals, who bury their dead, who come on the scene 300,000 years ago, hang out for 270,000 years ago, and compete with us, Homo sapiens, and they meet in the Middle East, and then they just die. What's the point?
Don't you believe that all humans will cease to exist at one point?
Maybe.
One way or the other?
Yeah,
Bill,
so that doesn't really address anything. Humans are temporary too.
Unless
unless there's a God in
eternity. The sun's going to burn up.
It's wasteful if you're limited on your resources.
Right.
If I don't have the complete understanding
I
from
mean,
God's point of view.
if you have $100 to buy groceries and you buy candy, that's wasteful.
But I mean, it's not to me. You know that that's one of the arguments.
But that's
against,
what I said earlier, that God enters into that death. He himself, who created all that, submits himself to that death process and dies.
So let me throw this out there, because you touched on, you said the magic word, understanding. So we could be chasing the wrong objective here, okay? And I'm going to start with the assumption that we're complex and unique, very unusual things. And I don't even like to use the word things. But the issue is, the problem with evolution, sudden evolution, or all of these things, is that they're tools. Okay? Tools will never give you an answer, an understanding. Tools will give you knowledge, okay? But knowledge is not understanding. The understanding that we seek, the questions why and what we are, these are questions of the metaphysics, okay? These are the questions of theology. So just the fact that we can try to figure out the mechanistic system that seems to be in existence, a hammer and a nail will never tell you what a house is. Okay, so what we're trying to do and what we think this world is all about is a spiritual and intellectual fulfillment. It's not the molecules running around here all over the place, or whether there was Homo sapiens or Homo whatever it is. The issue is that there's a greater thing out there that we really don't even have much of a grip on. And that's what we're trying to answer. That's where we're trying to go. So just looking at the mechanism things of the world and those physical elements will never get you to the metaphysical satisfying answer, because they're tools, and they're only tools.
But let me do this. We want to get that last video.
Sure.
So let me do this. On Coyne's book on page 78, he says this. He's talking about Ernest Hinkle. Hinkle's law has fallen into disrepute not only because it wasn't strictly true, but also because Hinkle was accused, largely unjustifiably, unjustly rather, of fudging some drawings of early embryos to make them look more similar than they really are. And if you go to the end note 19, he talks about why, okay, technically he was cheating, but it wasn't, you know, that we shouldn't dismiss this just because he fabricated some of this information. So, and I think this raised the issue. We don't want to attack the weakest arguments, but I think sometimes, on the other hand,
that's attacking
maybe
weakest arguments.
Evolutionists sometimes don't realize why there's some suspicion. So I've got a little video clip to show you, and we saw part of this with R and Rob, but that was 2 years ago. So it just brings up some of the issues about kind of cheating a little bit with the fossil evidence and stuff. So let me let's watch this clip. I don't want to you know, try to disprove something based on the weakest arguments. I think, you know, most people would agree that those were egregious errors and fraud. But at the same time, I'd like to see a little bit more openness and acknowledging of, hey, we have had these things in the past. You know, we'll probably find that in the future because we're all human. You know, just, theologically, we're talking about the sin nature. You know, so do Christians ever fabricate evidence?
No. What was it, Dr. Wyatt?
Probably so.
There's a Dr. Wyatt who claims to have found Noah's Ark and then also the chariots of the Egyptians in the Red Sea.
Well, that was atheist.
Yeah, I visited. Was that an atheist?
No, I'm just kidding.
Let me say, I'm not going to mention names, but I visited a nearby creation museum that. You know, there were things that didn't seem to. No, not that one. We're going to hopefully get to go visit that one.
Is it down in Glen Rose? Or?
Yeah, Glen Rose. So it was.
We're not associated.
It was definitely very problematic. In fact, at Criswell College, Bible College, you know, our science professor took us there on a field trip. And so we were all excited to go there, and we start looking at this stuff, and I'm cutting eyes at everybody, and it's like, I'm thinking, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And so we get back, and what did you guys think? And we're like, I'm afraid to say what I thought, you know. And then finally somebody said something, and then somebody else said, that's what I thought. And that didn't even look like a human footprint in the dinosaur footprint at all. It didn't even look human. And it finally says, that's exactly what I hoped you could see without any input to be able to evaluate these kinds of claims. And also, there were a lot of academic claims made by the guy running that turned out to be totally bogus. He didn't have those degrees or anything like that. So it happens, what I'm saying is it happens on both sides.
Yeah, what they did, it was a foot, they said, oh my gosh, it's a human footprint. You know, dinosaurs and humans coexisted. And then what it was an eroded dinosaur print. But they had a film, they made a film about it and later had to retract it because of the evidence. And they later, much later said, oh, it's not a human footprint, you know. And so,
but our book club's not that way. We are all honest. We are all searching for truth wherever it may lead us.
We're all unbiased.
Unbiased. Respectfully.
Well, when I went down to Glen Rose, I went there soon. We looked at that. It's really cool. You see the three, digit dinosaur tracks, and then you had the park ranger. Appreciate this, Dick. Was saying, well, 100 million years ago. Tyrannosaurus Rex, laid down these. And I said, that can't be true. The Earth's only 6,000 years old. And she looked at me. I'll never forget that look. She goes like, you jerk. What do you, and later I said, I'm just screwing with you.
Well, anyway, there's problems on both sides, Christians and atheists, evolutionists. We're all human. But part of what this club is all about is to get together, let's hear all the ideas, let's try to give them as much as we can, let's try to be as unbiased as possible and listen to those ideas. It may change the way we think on some things, it may modify some of our beliefs. I have felt challenged at times. Also, I feel like sometimes I've put some good questions out there as well. So I want to thank each of you for being here at the club. Hope you can be back February 1st when we're going to be looking at Science in the Mind of the Maker. And that if you didn't get one of these to put on your fridge or drop off at the local, somebody saw one of these at a Starbucks, and that's why they're here. So post them somewhere, help us get the word out as well. If you didn't get your free copy of Creation Q&A, please be sure to get that before you leave. And again, thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the club, and I look forward to seeing you next month.
Okay, thank you.